When you think about stuff like a logo, an identifier for a brand,
Yeah.
it's really easy to sort of focus on those things, and you might say it's important to have, a uniform and that people wear the right socks. But, something like training someone in customer service, like getting a smile or a thank you or something like that, is still a part of a brand and an experience.
Welcome to the Digital Marketing Wingman podcast, the podcast where we bring you helpful tips and advice on websites, Google, and social media. All right, everybody, welcome to the Digital Marketing Wingman podcast, episode number 8, I believe. The podcast where we share ideas and tips on digital marketing, websites, and Google. And today we've got a special guest, Mr. Corey Dodd from Elk Creative. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
For those that don't know, I think most people in the industry in Geelong would have heard of you by now. But for those that don't know, tell us a little bit more about Elk Creative.
So Elk Creative is, I guess, a business that I've started. I've sort of worked in the industry for like 20 years, which is rough to say, shows how old I am.
Yep.
But Elk Creative is a branding studio, so we're sort of focused on sort of helping clients from end to end, from understanding who their market is, what they're trying to do, and then with that production end of stuff, so logo design and a little bit of web development and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I believe you started out in Adelaide.
I did, yeah. So I mean, most of my life I've spent in Adelaide. Moved to Geelong to work for another agency, and did that for quite a few years, and then as happens, you run out of opportunity at a place, I guess, and you have bigger ideas and you want to start your own thing. So that's what I did. Started up my business probably 2.5 years ago. Pretty.
Full disclosure, you and I worked together for a very brief window of time.
We did, yes. Yep.
Was it as much as 4 weeks?
Probably.
Around that time, yeah. So we sort of just crossed paths in that time, and I guess I've stayed in touch since.
Yep.
So I got you on the show today because you are that branding guy, and you're very well respected in the industry for your branding. Very creative guy. I think there's some great talent in Geelong, but yours definitely stands above as that creative side of things. You're definitely a true artist. So can you, for our audience, tell us what is a brand?
Well, that's a really tough question, and I guess it's a really broad question, but to me, the idea of a brand, like, that people can confuse it for a lot of things. Obviously, people can confuse it for a logo, and I think the next thing that people sort of confuse that is what I would classify as an identity, and such as extended marketing material and even your name and more than your logo. But really, to me, a brand, the true meaning of a brand is it sounds really, I guess, almost wanky, but if you close your eyes and you say the name of something, then the emotive feeling that you have from that response is what the brand is. Yeah. And so
what you associate with, and yeah.
So really everything has a brand. So every person has a brand, every place has a brand. If you say like Uluru or Bondi, they have different meanings to you. And the thing with that, if you think about it, is that a brand then becomes personal to the person perceiving that brand rather than the actual owner of the brand.
Okay. And so for your service is branding.
Yep.
So what's branding? As opposed to a brand, what is branding?
Yeah, that's a good question. So really, like, if you think about that, everything has a brand, then, like I was saying, so some people may have different perceptions of a brand. So you might say something like Samsung, and we perceive them as different, but also you may find that people perceive them the same, but like them because they identify differently with them. So, if we say Apple and Samsung and they're different, someone might see Apple as expensive, and then another person might see it expensive, but then say, well, I get good value from that expensive, whereas someone else goes, it's extravagant, so it's not for me. So branding is actually trying to, I guess, massage and control.
Manipulate.
It's probably a horrible word. It's trying to be involved in
influence. Let's
influence.
say.
That's probably a better word. But even just being involved in that conversation. So it comes back to, I guess, first of all, understanding who you are as a business or a brand. Because there's personal branding and that sort of stuff. But trying to understand what that is, and then who you're talking to and what that message is. And so the act of branding, is trying to have some sort of guide to that, rather than leaving it up to everyone else. Because like I said, if everyone and everything has a brand and you're not doing anything about it, the branding is controlled by someone else.
Yeah. Okay. And so from a business perspective, why is branding so important?
It's I guess it's probably really about understanding, who your market is, and what message you're trying to portray. I guess the thing with it that I think is really important is that, I guess it's, like I said, about that control. And if you don't have control, or you don't have some sort of influence, or trying to, I guess, work out what you're trying to, say and achieve with a brand, then you're leaving that up to someone else. So that's really a risky thing to do. So if I like to think that everything is being branded and is being branded anyway.
Yeah.
And so if you're actually active, it's the same as marketing, right? Stuff is being marketed. People are having a perception around this stuff.
Yeah.
But if you start to actively do something about it, so that's really why it's important. It's more about what you're risking by not playing in that.
I'm not
area.
doing it. Yeah. Okay. And so when you touched on target audiences, I guess defining a brand that speaks to a target audience is really important these days, because not every brand or branding has to work for everybody, does it? It doesn't have to appeal to the masses.
No, I mean, it shouldn't.
Yeah. And it's that connection. You want to connect. So whatever the brand is, that emotion or that feeling that you get, that association, it needs to connect with your ideal customer.
Yep. Yeah. So 100%. So I think there's a bit of a misconception around, ideal customers, and that really there's multiple ways that you can break these down, and you can sort of target customers. For people like us, you might say, well, you might break that down by industry. You might break it down by services.
Yes.
So, you might be a specialist in, a specific service, an illustrator or an SEO person, and you just have one focus, or you might focus on an industry.
Yep.
But you can also focus on, demographics. You can focus on psychographics. So they're really how people think.
What are psychographics?
So psychographics are really the things that define how we perceive ourselves.
Right.
So, how you identify, where you put yourself in, as far as looking for things that are affordable versus extravagant.
Yeah.
And they change. They change from, within a person. They change from person to person, but also within a person from time to time, and for
different things.
Yeah. So you might highly value one sort of service, or sport.
Cars, or
you might
maybe my health is up there, but maybe my clothes are not that high.
Yeah, that's right. So really, it's just really important to sort of work out, I guess, what you're trying to.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're starting out a business, or you're starting up a new product or things like that, how do you establish a brand at the very start? Obviously, you need an identity.
Yep.
But beyond that, going into that, establishing emotion and connecting with people, how do you get started?
Well, I think like what we're just talking about with that ideal customer, and really it's sort of being, I guess there's a bit of truth, to being a bit truthful with yourself. So knowing, I guess, what it is you do and who you are. With businesses, there's a lot of talk about authenticity. Obviously that's like almost a buzzword these days.
Yeah.
And that really is kind of what that's about, like actually looking at yourself and working out what that is. And that really, the best thing about authenticity is that it makes your conversation a bit easier because you're being true to yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's probably the best place to start.
All forms of authentic marketing are generally easier to produce as well, because you're not thinking about it too long. You're not stressing over what do people think of this. You're actually just doing what you do. Yeah,
the more authentic you can be, the closer you are to yourself.
And you can tell these things, like when it comes to a website, you can tell if they're real photos, if they're the words from the actual owners.
Yep.
There's a feeling, and it's subtle, but it's obvious at the same time.
Yep.
So authenticity, absolutely agree with you there. That's a massive.
Yep. And so also, I think when you're starting out too, with trying to define some of those things, you sort of work out what your target market is. I think it is a good exercise, and it's almost like a business strategy.
Yeah.
To start to, if you want to go all in, you can actually start to identify that person and create almost like an avatar.
Yep.
And create like an idea of who that person is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, branding is, it does fall into that business planning strategy sort of space, doesn't it?
Yep. Yeah. There's a crossover. So some people don't have that business document.
Yeah.
Or they do, and there's a bit of a gap in there around who their market is.
Yeah. And that's really the investment in a branding agency such as yourself. It's not just, you're not just hiring a graphic designer to to put your idea in your head onto a bit of paper,
Yep.
there's a whole process behind that.
Yep.
That identifies all these aspects of a brand. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think with that as well, that one of the real tough thing, if you're starting out, if you, like, let's say you're talking about starting out as in for a startup or something like that, the real tough thing that I think people struggle with is to remove themselves from the conversation. Obviously, everyone starts a business and they want to be proud of that, but I think they often confuse their own personal desires with that market. So that's where trying to identify that is and who that is, and even creating a profile for someone. And, you know, maybe you call them Tom and it looks like this, and he's, you know, 50 and this is his sort of spending habits. If you can identify who that is, it makes it a little bit easier. So you see, when you talk to an established business, they start to know who their customers are. So obviously there's a little bit of guesswork going in with that, and you kind of need to readjust. But like, if you're established, you should be able to identify, look, these are the people that are working with, you know, that come to our business or buy our product or service. And, you know, there's this big trap where people sort of go, oh, you know, our product or our service is for everyone. And probably the easiest way to, like, sort of focus in on something is to look at where the sales or the spend is easiest and highest. So if there's people that you can identify that, you know, where the process just happens. So like in a service-based thing like what we have, it's where you can identify that the conversations work well, you're getting better results. So you start to realise, like, this whole process is good for both parties. Now, if you've got a product, you know, maybe you sell tyres or something like that, it's, well, what sort of tyres are you selling and what price point? And what people are making those sales the easiest, or you know, spending the most, or whatever. So, you know, it's not always about the most amount of money too. Someone might come in, I'll stick with tyres for a second, but someone might come in and they spend the most, but they, you know, mess you around, they shop around, they take a long time. Whereas someone might come in and they're just in that middle point, and they're the people that you sell to really easy. So that's a way to identify, you know, who a good customer is.
Do you think that personal brand is important, especially in the start? Like, I feel like for me, when nobody knows what Pixeled was, but they knew well, I had a limited network, but my limited network knew me. They didn't know Pixeled. But you know, how much do you invest in a personal brand versus your company's brand?
Well, personal brand is definitely important. I think personal brand's important regardless of whether you're, you know, in business for yourself or you work for other people.
Just your career brand, basically. It's
just career branding, I think there is a point where you can over-capitalise, and it depends. It does depend. Like, if you have a service business, maybe you're like a business coach or something like that, or a personal trainer, and you're always going to be centre of the brand. Whereas if you're, again, I'll go to tyres. If you run a tyre chain, I don't know what's the matter with tyres at the moment.
That's so good.
If you run a tyre chain, then it's likely that it's not going to be associated with a person. It's going to be associated with, you know, the product and the service that you offer.
Unless it's Bob's Tyres or something like that. But
I mean, I think it could take something like Bob Jane, and I think a lot of people would associate that with something more than, you know, an old racing car, you know, superstar or whatever. So personal brand, I think if you understand, if your business is really always going to be tied to yourself, then sort of, you know, that's when you double down on that. But initially, I think that people should be, you know, thinking about personal brand kind of anyway. And I know this is sort of going back to that big question around what is brand, and we do that. We do that anyway. We do that with our friends and our family. You know, we sort of control our behaviour or think in certain ways and do different things. And so really it's just doing that outside of a personal sense and doing that with that business mindset. And that's so,
I have heard strategies where business owners are really strong on the personal brands of all of their employees, and they really push that. And then I've heard other strategies where they want to protect that, and there's no one person or face that is connected to the client. They actually want to protect it so that staff are interchangeable. Now, there's positives and negatives for both styles, and I guess it comes back to your overall business strategy. But I personally am a fan of, Nick and I in particular, having our own brands and having that connection, because it builds that connection with people at the end of the day.
I think that's true. And, you know, if I thought you were going to ask which one is better, and I'm like, you know, it's pretty obvious. Like, what place would you prefer to
I have
work
a preference.
For, you know?
I have a preference, but I'm not saying it's right or wrong. And
I think that sort of goes back to what we were saying before about authenticity. That's just really, there's a lot of these old, Mad Men style marketing ideas, and they just don't cut it anymore. And that's why stuff like being authentic and, culture and those sorts of things are really big. And, I was thinking about this as I'm sort of rubbishing on about brand itself. And, when you think about stuff like a logo, an identifier for a brand, it's really easy to sort of focus on those things, and you might say it's important to have a uniform and that people wear the right socks, but something like training someone in customer service, like getting a smile or a thank you or something like that, is still a part of a brand and an experience.
Well, on that, one of the best things I've seen at Bean Squeeze drive-through coffee shops, there's a sign that I think it says their mission or whatever it is to have you leave happier. And every single person, when you come to that window, how are you? They're smiling. How's your day? And then when you go around the corner to pay, how are you? How's your day? It's absolutely their brand. That's not just a coincidence that they're hiring happy people all the time and they're always happy every time I drive through. That must be part of their branding strategy. And they do it really, really well. And I guess that's why I was saying, if at the very start, if you kind of close your eyes and you picture that experience, it's just bigger than anything. There are other things that we use, and I think that stuff that we talk about as far as identity, whether it's logos or a name of a business, they really are just those identifiers, and not the actual brand itself. But they're important. They're really important things. All right, so fast forward a little bit. Say if you're established and you've got a brand and you've identified all of these characteristics and your target audience and things like that. What are some of the ways that you can increase your brand awareness? You've got a good brand, but it's just not out there. What are the main channels? I mean, obviously, this can go super broad, and who are we talking about? But just in general terms, what are some great ways?
Well, there's probably two things. There's probably one thing that I would say around that first before you sort of get stuck into that, and that is like, there's a bit of a focus these days on numbers and growth around stuff, and growth for the sake of growth isn't really that important. I think we can fixate on those things, and if you're chasing a certain amount of followers on something, when you break it down, like a business like mine, I only need a small amount of people to engage me and interact with me. So if I had 50,000 people following me and none of those people actually cared about what I did, it's not important. But growing that brand awareness, look, it's the same as like personal branding. It's about about getting out there and being seen. And so it probably comes down to all forms of marketing. There's stuff you can do yourself. There's
content creation, video, blogs, social media posts. So nearly everything that you see in marketing, and even the things I'm talking about around branding, are things that people can do themselves, but it's most of the time they don't have the insight or the resources, and it's not worth their time to be doing that stuff when they can hire someone that does that stuff. It's kind of an intangible benefit, brand awareness, because you don't get a direct here's how many sales you made from brand awareness. It doesn't equate on a Google ad campaign or a Facebook campaign.
There's no KPI and there's no like metrics around it.
You can. You can put metrics on it, but they don't equate to a dollar. There's no business result from that. So as you say, likes and followers, that's great, and I guess you're building an audience, which is an asset. But it doesn't necessarily equate to sales. It could. Doesn't necessarily. Likewise for site visits, you can get thousands of people reading your blog, but if they're not actually leading to become customers, is there actually any business benefit to that? And
really, that's almost like that authenticity thing again, because if you're blogging around things that are really close to what it is that your brand is connected to, rather than going, what's a good topic for me to write about for traffic? If it's close to the things that are at the end of your service, then you're probably going to capture some of that stuff easier. So I think growing brand awareness is, it's really important, but it can be, kind of over.
You can become misguided on its purpose. I think maybe like in the professional services or B2B space, there's limited, like you say, there's a certain amount of people that you want to deal with, and perhaps mass awareness is more suited to, say, online retailers where they might not have the same relationship building or the same ticket value of their sales. So in those cases, maybe those vanity metrics have a bit more value than to your eye.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I definitely agree. Yeah.
Podcasts is one of them, I suppose. Podcasting is the new. Well, it's not that new anymore. People have been going on about podcasts for a while now, and
it's really hitting a stride though now.
It's starting to hit stride, yeah. And obviously I'm on board now. I feel like I'm pretty late to the party.
Yep. I don't think so.
Well, not as late as some, but I'm still late. Like I feel like I missed the opportunity there to go to be big.
Yep.
Well, big in small in my small circle, but I've had contact from somebody overseas already after 7 podcasts from some US agency to come on the podcast, which is awesome. I don't know why they want to be on my little podcast.
It's good quality.
But you know what? It's creating networking. It's creating awareness. They must have found that by searching for digital marketing podcasts. So I guess the hopes is that expands.
Yep.
How have you gone with your podcasting? Have you had actually any business come out of it? Any leads? Because you've done quite a few now, haven't you?
Yeah, no, so I haven't really had leads. It's not something that I guess...
Or relationships? Any good relationships?
Yeah, I built quite a few relationships with people. I guess a lot of the time, the stuff that I'm doing is working with or talking to people in this setting. So it's not like I guess, a sales pitch. It's just a conversation. And a lot of the podcasts that I've been on have been, I guess the audience is other people in the industry.
Right.
And so, I mean, I'm making contacts through that, and I think that's, this is personal brand stuff versus business brand stuff, but networking within your industry is a really positive thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I haven't actually made sales and stuff through that, but I don't think that's my goal. And if it was my goal, I probably would treat that differently. I think I would be creating content that's specifically geared around. I'd take that step back and say, well, who is the audience?
Yes.
And what can I do to attract them? What are their, it's those questions that you would have with customers, like what are your pain points? Or what are your customers' pain points? What are the problems you're trying to solve for them? So that goes across all content, and that's really, that can go across, anything from advertising to marketing, from podcast to social to everything.
Yeah.
And when you're sort of saying, like, what stuff should people do? I think there's a bit of a paralysis. Where what's the word?
Paralysis?
That's it. where there's so much stuff that you can do, and I think sometimes you need to pick and choose.
Yeah. What you're good at.
What you're good at.
Yeah. What you can be authentic in, and if you're awkward on live video and you can't speak and.
Yep. And you can't say
paralysis. Maybe video's not the one for you, not the channel for you. Maybe writing is your thing.
Yep. Yeah.
Or maybe good photography, great imagery. Or
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, we sort of covered this a little bit, but the measurements that we can put in place for brand awareness. We touched on social media engagement.
Yep.
So I guess people liking, following your page.
Yep. And it's probably more. I think probably when I was saying about that numbers, chasing that numbers.
Yeah.
I think you would agree with this too. That really engagement is greater than the numbers. So if people can actually, if they're commenting, that's like
real engagement.
That's equivalent to like 50 likes. That's someone actually bothering to say something on a post.
I don't know if there's a word for it, or there probably is. I just don't know it. But like I would call it deep engagement, where it's not just flicking through, click the like button, and then moving on. Yeah, they're actually, but that relies on you engaging back.
It does,
and you have to actually prompt or provoke that engagement. So that can be done via what you're writing in your posts. You can ask questions, but when somebody replies, make sure you comment back. Like you've got to get back. You have to get back to people.
Yep.
And a really good tactic is to respond with another question and get them to keep, make it a conversation and keep it going. And then your the engagement score that behind the scenes that Facebook gives your post will be jumping through the roof, and it's probably going to get more reach and just snowballs from there.
Yep. Yeah. So I don't know what other real metrics that we sort of
site visits. I guess your Google Analytics. You could look at how many visits you're getting. Are people returning? Are they unique visitors? Are they coming back? If you're doing any kind of campaigns to increase your brand awareness, you could be looking at traffic sources.
Yep.
So if you're doing a mass push on social media and you see a spike in your social media referral traffic, then great. Outside of that, I'm not sure. you can, you know, this happens all the time with new businesses, and we try and think of ways at Pixel to try and measure these campaigns. And unless you physically ask each customer, how did you hear about us?
Yep.
It can be tricky, but you could do promotions.
Yep.
Where there's specific coupons for specific target audiences or things like that.
Specific landing pages and things like that. To know where people are coming from and going to.
Yeah, but it can be a bit of work. You know, that's for a startup business. That can be quite a lot of stuff to try and set up. So if you keep it simple, I think always keeping in mind that it's a vanity metric, the social media likes and stuff like that. But and to be honest, the site visits as well. So it might come down to gut feel at the end of the day.
You know, and really, if you think about like before we had that, you know, these metrics that we get from the internet, you know, with traditional marketing, it was all sort of guesswork. Like they would do sort of calculations on how many people are watching a TV show, and that must mean a certain amount of people have seen your ad, but it doesn't mean people haven't, you know, gone to the fridge and that, or they're just, you know, tuning out, or it doesn't really mean very much. So, you know, in a strange way, we become a little bit reliant on those metrics, and I think people put a lot of pressure on that, but it's only always telling us part of the story. So, you know, around that brand awareness, it's not like there's one number that you can get to be like, okay, we've done it, we've cracked it, and I think a lot of the time it is gut feel. Like, what are the numbers on something like Apple? Well, you know, you just know that every person knows these brands. So you start to understand. I mean,
over the long term, you get that feeling. You would understand it.
I mean, for example, with me, you know, if I run into people in the industry and they go, and I haven't met them before, when they understand the business that I'm from, they go, oh, you know, I know your work, so it means that you know, I don't have a metric for that.
No.
But when I actually meet those people and they go, oh, you know, I know the stuff that you do.
It's a solid tick.
It's a solid tick.
Yeah.
So I don't know, and we didn't have that stuff once upon a time. You know, you go back. It was probably only like 15 years ago, when there wasn't really any method to track all of this stuff. So, I mean, I'm not saying that it's not important, and you know, forget about it all.
Just be careful with how you weight it.
And, you know, as with all statistics, I think, you know, they can be skewed, and I've worked with brands where they have said, you know, well, our target audience, we believe it's this because of you know, these are the people that are engaging with us, and one was specifically they said it was young mums. I'm like, it didn't match what their product was. But they did a couple of giveaways that were like mum and children packs, and I'm like, well, that's controlled that whole conversation. So you know, even though they're looking at data and that data was true, they'd sort of manipulated it themselves. They'd set it up.
Okay. Well, I'm conscious of taking up too much of your time, Corey, but thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it. And as usual, you can hear this podcast on the Pixel website, on YouTube, on Spotify, and of course iTunes. And if you can, it'd be great if you could leave us a review and a rating on there. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Corey.